corporate mainstream media began a huge disinformation campaign as soon as Laurent Gbagbo came to power in Ivory Coast in 2006. In Ivory Coast in 2000. In 2006, Laurent and Simone Gbagbo even won a case at the Paris Court of Appeal, who had accused them of having death squads, which was, they won the case in the end because it was found to be totally unfounded. Yet this stigmatization remains to this day. At the height of the crisis in 2011, Gbagbo was painted as the illegitimate dictator wanting to hold on to power by all means. This is still found in media despite a 9-year kangaroo trial at the International Criminal Court, which acquitted him of all charges, and an acquittal for alleged crimes against humanity also of his Simone Evet Gbagbo in Ivory Coast. So my question is, we've covered it a little bit already, but how has mainstream media, the corporate media, dealt with this crisis? We've already talked a little bit about this. What are the major talking points of the so-called Africa experts, what they have used in this crisis? Si tu veux traduire, Ima.
Oui, donc justement dans ce passage, dans ce paragraphe, on parle du rôle des médias, dans les pays en guerre. Donc les médias grand public ont lancé une vaste campagne de désinformation peu après l'arrivée au pouvoir de Laurent Gbagbo en Côte d'Ivoire. En 2006, il a même obtenu gain de cause devant la Cour d'appel de Paris contre le journal Le Monde pour diffamation. Le prestigieux journal français ayant en effet écrit que lui et son épouse Simone Gbagbo avaient fait usage d'escadrons de la mort. Un fait totalement infondé. Pourtant, cette stigmatisation demeure à ce jour. Au plus fort de la crise de 2011, Gbagbo a été dépeint comme le dictateur illégitime voulant s'accrocher au pouvoir par tous les moyens. Cela se retrouve encore dans les médias malgré un procès kangourou de 9 ans tenu à la Cour pénale internationale qu'il a acquitté de toutes les charges et un acquittement pour les crimes présumés contre l'humanité de Simone Evet Gbagbo. Donc la question, c'est comment les principaux médias entreprennent-ils traiter la crise et quels principaux arguments souvent erronés les soi-disant experts de l'Afrique utilisent-ils pour décrire cette crise? Donc nous attendons la réponse de ELIAS puis de ASTER ou ELIAS l'un après l'autre. Mais ce serait intéressant d'avoir cet éclairage par rapport aux médias sur le cas de l'Éthiopie.
Before going on to ask you the same question, Elias, I just want to show a small clip of Alex Deval, just to show you what type of disinformation we are talking about. Si la régie peut montrer la vidéo de Alex Deval, l'un des soi-disant experts sur l'Éthiopie et sur la guerre en question.
The only thing left actually for the National Defense Forces is to negotiate its surrender or withdrawal from Tigray. That is...
The future of Ethiopia will for sure be very, very different to the past. That full stream of a revived empire will be buried for good.
And members of the Tigray Defense Forces, you have won the respect of everybody. The doctrine of a just war has rarely had so clear an exemplar.
For viewers from Côte d'Ivoire and West Africa, the same pattern of demonization, as you mentioned in your intro, Emma, about Laurent Gbagbo was demonized, is happening also in East Africa. So there's a lot we can learn from each other's experience. We must constantly exchange information like that. So I refer to one good analyst, media analyst called Michel Collomb from Belgium, Investigation. For war propaganda, I said there are 5 principles, how they use. And this pattern is used all over by imperialism, by neocolonialism, media propaganda, psychological warfare. Number 1, you hide history. So they always hide history. They only talk about the recent events, November. So they never will tell you the 27 years of tyrannical misrule of the TPLF. That historical background and context is always hidden by the media. The second is obscure the economic interest. Cote d'Ivoire, for example, or all over West Africa, France has huge economic interest. As once President of France, Jacques Chirac, said, without Africa, France would be a poor third-rate country, right? For every euro that France has, 60 cents come from Africa. From Cote d'Ivoire, from Mali, from Niger, from Gabon, from all this Francophonie Africa. Imperialism, neocolonialism operates in the same. The economic interests are hidden always. And thirdly, demonize. You demonize the leaders, the good leaders. If it's Thomas Sankara in Burkina Faso, or Nkrumah in Ghana, or Sékou Touré in Guinea, or Amilcar Cabral, or Patrice Lumumba, you remember way back in Congo, who was assassinated, visionary leader, or Isaias Afwerki in Eritrea. These kind of visionary leaders, or Laurent Gbagbo also, is, to my reading, I don't know much, but I know at least when Western media demonizes an African leader, that leader is doing good, it means. When Western media demonizes Abiy Ahmed Ali in Ethiopia, automatically Africans should say, oh, this is a good leader. So we must decolonize our mind from this Western propaganda and see these patterns. So demonization operates all over. Number 4, as I mentioned before, is inverting the victim and aggressor. They always do that. So the one who is been victimized, who is defending himself or herself from aggression, the victim becomes the aggressor, and the aggressor becomes the victim. So this inversion always operates in war propaganda, psychological warfare of the Western media. And number 5, of course, total information dominance, monopoly of news. So no alternative news or truth is allowed to come in the Western media. So you will have CNN, Agence France Presse, Deutsche Welle, BBC, and what have you. All this vast network of Western media sings the same song. Aksum Massacre, Aksum Massacre. It's a manufactured genocide in Tigray. The famine situation. The Ethiopian government is portrayed as you know, as committing, as deliberately starving the poor people of Tigray. It is the opposite is true. It is the TPLF who's holding the people of Tigray hijacked. It is the TPLF who's committing massive atrocities in the AMHARA region, for example, in the AFAR that it invaded recently. So much so that these atrocities became impossible to hide. Once again, Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch had to reluctantly admit that atrocities are being committed by TPLF soldiers in AMHARA, in AFAR, and so on and so forth. But because the Western mainstream media is so huge and so vast, and it operates 24/7, it's like a huge machine. So we in Africa do not have media like that to fight for us. Unfortunately, the only avenues we have are small alternative medias like yours, for example, and NTV. What we're doing, this program is trying to counter the disinformation network. But this is the pattern that has been happening. In this regard, I think you must invite one very brilliant young Eritrean called Dr. Simon Tesfamariam of the New Africa Institute. He had documented in 70 pages, well-researched, how the disinformation has been operating the past 14 months in Tigray. He called his paper Disinformation in Tigray, Manufacturing Consent for a Secessionist War. So point by point, he debunks all this disinformation by CNN's Ni'ma al-Baghr, by all these actors that you have mentioned, Alex de Waal, the British guy at Tufts University with his World Peace Federation. Alex de Waal has been for decades the advisor of Meles Zenawi. He is in cahoots with the TPLF. He is guilty of, by association, of all the crimes that TPLF committed in Ethiopia. But now, of course, he's in a position and he's an expert in propaganda. He constantly is brought in BBC as expert, in other media channels, to give false narrative and disinformation. There are others that my sister Azeb mentioned, such as the Norwegian Kjetil Tronvoll, such as the Dutch Holland woman called Miriam van Ruysen, International Crisis Group William Davison. I mean, they're legion. There are so many operating, and they're getting paid. How? Well, as we mentioned before, in its 27 years of tyrannical misrule, the TPLF was a kleptocratic regime. Africa had never witnessed such level of kleptocracy. Some say like Mobutu in Zaire. Mobutu was, what he stole from Zaire is a child's play. It was only $5 billion. In fact, to some degree, Mobutu was a nationalist. He constructed universities and so on and so forth. The TPLF stole from Ethiopia, I would say, $70 billion. So where is this money? It is, of course, in Western banks. Now it is using this money to buy influence, to buy reporters. You have a notorious case is the CNN reporter Ni'ma al-Baghr. She's Sudanese by origin, but a black face doing the dirty work for imperialism's propaganda network, CNN. She manufactures news. She amplifies the Tigray genocide, rape of women. That never happened in Tigray by Ethiopian soldiers or Eritrean soldiers. But because it's CNN, it is given like credibility. But this is how the disinformation network has been operating. And eventually, in the end, then this is brought as sort of evidence, and the Western governments, the United States, bring it to the United Nations in order to paint the Ethiopian government as committing atrocities. Therefore, humanitarian intervention is warranted. That's how they operate. That's how they did it in Libya, for example, in 2011. They constantly use propaganda, amnesty, fake reports. Gaddafi is bringing African mercenaries to commit rapes on poor Arab women, massacres that never happened. Eventually, they took this case to the United Nations. Unfortunately, at that time, China and Russia were asleep, so they slipped it in. Through that, then NATO intervened, and what happened in Libya. Libya is now what? It's a destroyed country, totally destroyed. It will take it decades to recover from the devastation. But this is how their so-called humanitarian intervention, their so-called responsibility to protect doctrine operates. They manufacture crisis, and then they justify intervention to do what they want, to destroy nations or to bring about regime change and so on and so forth.
No, excellent. Actually, we told Michel Collin to listen to this. Pierre Ima is a very good friend of his.
Yes,
Salou,
he's looking
my hero. He's a very brilliant analyst in
this emission down.
He's watching us.
Yes.
Okay.
Maybe, I don't know. We told
I'm
him.
very
But
happy that
Michel
he's
Collin,
watching.
he
We learned a
writes
lot from him.
Yes, he writes a book, Libye and Média Mensonges.
Yes.
To tell about fake news,
Great guy. He has done a documentary on Eritrea, in fact, Eritrea Come and See, which is also in French and in English that one time perhaps you can share about it.
Right.
Oh, we should have another program with him on.
Yes.
That would be interesting.
He want to not. He write me just beyond the emission. He tell me he want to know a lot of about AMHARA and AFAR massacre. He tell.
Okay, sure.
So, je dis en français, donc vite, qu'on peut apprendre beaucoup entre l'Afrique de l'Ouest et l'Afrique de l'Est, parce que vraiment, on a beaucoup de choses à apprendre.
Tout à fait.
Des choses qui se répètent. Et Elias Amare nous donne l'exemple de Michel Colomb, qui avait bien parlé de la guerre, de la propagande.
Propaganda, dans le livre.
Et comment l'on l'utilise, comme par exemple, la première chose qu'on fait, c'est qu'on cache l'histoire. Et donc, on met toujours l'histoire hors de contexte, non? Donc, on ne donne jamais le contexte de quel on parle. La deuxième chose qu'on cache vraiment, qui est toujours très obscure, c'est les intérêts économiques, non? Et donc, comme par exemple, Barre nous rappelle que Chirac avait dit que pour chaque euro, il y en avait quand même 60 centimes qui venaient de l'Afrique. Après, une autre chose, donc vraiment, on ne dit jamais les intérêts économiques, les ressources naturelles, on n'en parle jamais.
Tout à fait.
Après, on démonise les bons leaders. Donc, on l'a vu dans l'histoire, on parle de Gbagbo, du président de l'Érythrée aujourd'hui, de Nkrumah, de Lumumba. Tous les grands leaders africains ont été vraiment...
Don't forget Thomas Sankara.
Yes.
Sankara, Sankara, today, Mali, you know. And, donc, on débolit.
Et surtout, actuellement, Modibo Keïta pour le Mali qu'ils ont dégommé.
Oui, vraiment. Et donc, Elias Amare nous suggère de décoloniser notre cerveau, de sortir de cette... parce qu'ils arrivent vraiment aussi, une autre chose qu'ils font tout le temps, c'est de invertir ce qui est la victime et l'agresseur, non? Et c'est toujours une chose qu'on voit tout le temps. Et après, bon, c'est aussi parce qu'ils dominent dans une manière très forte, ils sont tentaculaires, on voit qu'ils répètent la même chose, donc on voit que AFP, BBC, Deutsche Welle, ça vont être vraiment, et ils répètent les mêmes choses. Dans le cas ici, on a même parlé de génocide dans la région Tigré quand il n'y en avait pas, hein, mais c'était vraiment pour inciter à une intervention militaire. C'est un peu ça le but. Et donc, je vois ici que, donc, même, et naturellement, c'est une énorme machine qui marche 24 heures sur 7. Donc, comment s'opposer à tout ça? Et c'est très difficile à faire. Donc, c'est juste avec des petites chaînes comme nous, comme notre chaîne, qui essaye de contraster cette énorme désinformation. Et par rapport à cette crise-là, il y a un rapport magnifique de Simon, how is his last name?
Simon Tesfamariam.
Tesfamariam, un magnifique
The
rapport.
New Africa Institute.
Du nouveau Africa Institute, c'est un rapport fantastique. Je l'ai lu 3 fois parce que c'est tellement riche d'informations, et c'est sur la désinformation dans cette dernière crise. Et il analyse vraiment toutes les mots-clés, toutes les instances, les réseaux qu'ils ont et il fait vraiment une analyse très pointue de la désinformation dans les premières 2 ans de la guerre. Et
in fact, some comrades of Michel Colomb are translating it into French. Hopefully, it is finished by now. So we will try to share it with you, with the audience.
C'est magnifique. Donc, on vient de savoir que Michel Colomb est en train de traduire ce papier, qui est magnifique en français. Donc, sera aussi disponible pour un public qui lit seulement le français. Et donc, on voit par exemple que le personnage qu'on a montré là dans la vidéo, qui carrément parle d'une guerre juste, que cette guerre de l'TPLF, c'est la seule guerre juste. Bon, c'était carrément la personne qui donnait qui était à côté de Meles Zenawi, qui est l'un des leaders du TPLF pendant des années. Donc, lui, vraiment, il devrait être aussi coupable par association. Bien sûr. Parce qu'il a passé toutes ces années-là. On a d'autres noms comme Van Rijssen, un groupe terrible qui fait beaucoup de travail dans la désinformation, c'est International Crisis Group.
Martin Plaut in UK.
Martin Plaut, j'ai vu celui-là, Trovar, le norvégien, un norvégien aussi que j'ai vu souvent mentionné. Et ça c'est terrible parce que dans le cas vraiment de l'Éthiopie, ils ont beaucoup volé, même plus selon AMHARA que Mobutu, qui avait quand même une vision nationaliste, qui avait construit quand même des maisons, des appartements, des maisons, des universités. Il n'était pas comme un régime kleptocratique au niveau de celui de l'Éthiopie, non? Et donc, et on a aussi, par exemple, une reporter du CNN, I don't remember her name, mais I know.
Nirma Al-Bakr. Nirma Al-Bakr.
Yeah. Et elle est
Sudanese of origin, but very notorious liar.
Donc, elle est noire, donc ça passe comme image et on l'utilise beaucoup, beaucoup. Elle a fabriqué des histoires incroyables sur cette dernière crise. Et bon, c'est plus ou moins ce qu'on voit aussi, dans le cas de la Libye, où on a vu que in Libya they actually said that he was giving Viagra to his soldiers. That it's just such a stupid story.
Incredible liars.
En Libye, ils avaient dit qu'on avait que Gaddafi donnait du Viagra aux soldats et tout ça naturellement pour fabriquer, pour après faire un changement de régime. C'est ça un peu le but de tout ça, malheureusement. And I hope you are not tired. If it's too late.
No, not at all. I'm fine, but I don't know. Perhaps it's late for our sister Aster.
Aster, you okay? I think with the
Ok, on arrive dans la partie de la psychologie maintenant. Je te laisse introduire en anglais, Nikki.
Okay, so we have something on psyops. The most outrageous psyops in the case of Ivory Coast was perhaps Bouaké, an event which saw 9 French soldiers and an American killed in the bombing of a French military base in Ivory Coast in 2004. The incident was blamed on Gbagbo. The entire Ivorian aircraft was destroyed and an arms embargo followed. Also, 2 crime incidents in the post-election crisis, the shooting of women during a march and the shelling of a market, were also blamed on Gbagbo. But 9 years of evidence at trial proved the accusations were wrong. What PSYOP operations can you think of in this crisis?
Donc, les opérations psychologiques de déstabilisation. Donc, le PSYOPS le plus scandaleux dans le cas de la Côte d'Ivoire était peut-être Bouaké. Un événement qui a vu 9 soldats français et un Américain tués dans le bombardement d'une base militaire française en Côte d'Ivoire. L'incident a été imputé à Gbagbo. L'ensemble de l'aviation militaire de la Côte d'Ivoire a été détruit et un embargo sur les armes a suivi. 2 incidents criminels dans la crise post-électorale, l'assassinat de femmes dans une marche et le bombardement d'un marché ont également été imputés à Gbagbo, mais encore une fois, 9 ans de preuves au procès, 9 ans de preuves au procès ont prouvé que l'accusation était fausse. Donc la question, c'est quel type d'opération psychologique de déstabilisation, de manipulation ont-ils utilisé dans la crise en Éthiopie, au Tigré et en Érythrée? Voilà.
Which you want to answer? Aster, you want to answer?
I think this question is connected to what we have been discussing earlier. The fabrication of fake news and disinformation and the effects that the disinformation and fake news have. Regarding the conflict and the Ethiopian situation, we could say that the fake news and the information that have been produced, as we said, by the international media, by different scholars and newspapers, the impact was, as I mentioned before, it has highly damaged or considerably damaged the prestige of Ethiopia and the Ethiopian government. In fact, these informations have, as we said, transformed the victim into aggressor. So Ethiopia was presented in the international global media as the aggressor, as a warmonger in the country. And a number of examples could be mentioned. Some of them we have mentioned them before. For example, the fact that the Ethiopian military has bombed the Magale University, The other example we mentioned, that is killing that took place in Aksum. And there are a number of examples that we mention now. For example, the fact that the AMHARA special forces also were transformed in aggressors in this conflict. We know that the AMHARA special forces had helped the Ethiopian Defense Force after the attack on November 4, 2020. But after helping the national Ethiopian forces, the AMHARA special forces never crossed the Tigrayan border. They remained within the AMHARA territory. But we have seen that the diplomats, Western diplomats, international journalists have requested the Ethiopian government to withdraw its troops. But they have also requested that the AMHARA special forces have to be withdrawn from Tigray. These are some of the other examples. And one of the recent issue that mentioned in relation to this is, for example, that the TPLF was quite new to Addis Ababa, and many Western diplomats, and particularly the CNN, have repeatedly said that within a few days that the TPLF will be occupying Addis Ababa. In relation to this, the American embassy in Addis has made a number of appeals to its citizens. It has appealed its citizens to leave the capital city of Ethiopia. At the same time, it has appealed to would-be tourists into Ethiopia not to come to Ethiopia. I remember the American embassy also was willing, expressed that its willingness to give some kind of financial aid to those American citizens who didn't have the capacity to buy airplane tickets to go back to their country. And these are some of the examples that had some kind of direct and indirect impact on the politics of Ethiopia and on the government of Ethiopia.
Non, donc beaucoup des questions on avait déjà justement traitées avant sous la question des fausses médias, parce qu'effectivement c'est une manipulation. Donc pour ceux qui on a discuté déjà sur la question d'Aksum par exemple, ou l'attaque de l'université, ou même on a fait semblant que le groupe des forces spéciales des AMHARA étaient eux les agresseurs, quand eux en réalité ils accompagnaient simplement l'armée nationale dans la guerre. Donc, mais on les avait vraiment ciblés, on avait même demandé à eux de se retirer du conflit quand ils étaient en train de protéger leur région. Donc c'était une chose vraiment très bizarre. Et donc, et même aussi une autre chose, un peu de déstabilisation psychologique, c'était que même si c'est effectivement la guerre, ils étaient avancés vers Addis Ababa, mais ils n'étaient pas vraiment dans la ville. Tous les journaux avaient écrit qu'il fallait quitter le pays, que les touristes ne devaient pas y aller. C'était un peu une manière aussi de pousser à cet changement, voilà, à donner une déstabilisation au pays, non? Parce que tu te sens très déstabilisé comme pays si à un certain moment tous les journaux disent quittez le pays pour laisser, donc un peu comme on fait en Ukraine maintenant, mais bon, ça on le voit. Bon, et I don't know, Elias, if you have something else to say on the PSYOPs or...
Well, perhaps to add to debunk these false narratives, notorious false narratives, such as the Aksum massacre that never happened, and it's blamed on Eritrean troops. One, the stories constantly keep changing. For example, an Amnesty report came out. I forget whether it's Amnesty or Human Rights Watch, one of the two anyway, that the massacre in this Tigrayan city called Aksum, which is a historic ancient city, happened on November 28, 29, 30. But fortunately, November 29 of 2020 was the religious holiday, sacred holiday of the patron saint of that city, Saint Mary of Zion. So Ethiopian television covered this event, this celebration. Normally, almost over 1 million Ethiopians from all over Ethiopia come to as pilgrims to visit during this holiday. But during that time, because of the war situation, the number of celebrants was only in the hundreds of thousands. So the witnesses, the Tigrayan civilians, said, no, everything is peaceful. The only thing is that unlike previous years where we had over 1 million visitors, this year the number was only 100,000 due to the war situation. Other than that, nothing has happened. So this was on record. So how is it that they missed it? This Aksum massacre that's supposed to happen, in which 800 civilians were massacred by Eritrean soldiers, the residents of the city of Aksum never mentioned it. There are other credible witnesses who debunked it, but still, this the stories keep changing. The falsehoods, when one lie is exposed, another lie is brought forward, and so on and so forth. And this is how it operates. The other case is one of a young Tigrayan lady called Mona Lisa Abraha, who claimed first, she came out and said it was Ethiopian soldiers who cut her arm and raped her. And then a few weeks later, the story changed and says, oh no, it was Eritrean soldiers. Finally, her father, who lives abroad, said, no, I've been calling and, they were hiding from me. She was a militia. So, she was wounded in battle, and unfortunately, she lost her arm and leg, I think. But the rape story was fake. These kinds of fake stories are repeated over and over again. Another thing, when the TPLF was defeated and as it withdrew from Mekelle, the capital city, and fled to the countryside, to the bushes, it released from the prisons of Mekelle and other cities of Tigray 13,100 hardened criminals, some of them rapists. It released them and let them loose on the civilians of Tigray, knowing that this would commit crimes. In fact, it dressed them up as it gave them uniforms of Ethiopian army, Eritrean army, because it had a textile factory called Almeda Charka Chark, a big textile factory that produced uniforms in previous years for Ethiopian army, and they had also, for some reason, been producing Eritrean army uniforms. So this released thousands of prisoners were dressed up as soldiers, and they were let loose on the civilians. So for weeks, Tigray was in chaos from these hardened criminals committing all kinds of crimes on the civilians, rapes, and so on and so forth. In fact, in the capital city of Mekelle, for a brief time, law and order had disintegrated, and it was a situation of chaos until the Ethiopian army came and restored order. So the crimes committed by these criminal elements then was blamed on either Ethiopian soldiers or Eritrean soldiers. So you have many such kind of psyops, false flag operations, massacres that never happened or that were dramatized on picture. The CNN reporter Naim Al-Baghr, for example, used one such video footage whose authenticity cannot be verified. They dress some of their soldiers as Ethiopian soldiers, and you see them shooting captured civilians. But these are the false flag operations, the psyops that then the Western human rights organizations and the Western media take as as gospel truth and amplify them and so on and so forth. The other thing, as Aster mentioned, was in around October of last year, the TPLF had made advances southwards and to Wollo and to Dessie and Kombelsha cities. So while it was still far away from Addis Ababa, about 300 kilometers away to the north, the Western media such as CNN were presenting stories as if they were in the suburbs of Addis Ababa, 10 kilometers or 15 kilometers outside Addis Ababa, knocking at the gates of Addis Ababa, that they would enter Addis Ababa anytime soon. This was done deliberately as a psychological warfare to create panic in the city of Addis Ababa. In fact, the American embassy was issuing warnings and putting pressure on other embassies. Some African embassies, such as Zambian embassy, withdrew its staff from Addis Ababa around that time. So all this was a psyop to create panic in the residents of Addis Ababa and also in the diplomatic corps. You have to take into consideration that Addis Ababa is the seat of the African Union. So you have a huge number of diplomats there. What they wanted to create was a panic situation where these diplomats would flee the country. And so, a sort of regime change could be created then from within the city, because also at the same time, the TPLF and other terrorist elements had infiltrated into the city, tens of thousands of armed combatants waiting in the wings for a signal to create a situation of chaos in the capital city of Addis Ababa. So this kind of psychological warfare, psyops, with the complicity of the Western embassies, notorious of this was the US embassy in Addis Ababa, the Western media such as CNN, BBC, were creating this type of falsehood, false stories, as if the enemy, the TPLF, was literally knocking at the gates of Addis Ababa and would enter Addis Ababa anytime. Never happened. They were far away, at least 300 kilometers far from Addis Ababa. And within weeks, in fact, once the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, as Commander-in-Chief, took charge and went to the battlefront, they were routed, defeated severely, and fled helter-skelter back to Tigray, where they are confined now. But still, even now, they are committing atrocities in AFAR, in Raya area of AMHARA. And so, this kind of psyops continue with the complicity of Western media.
Ok, donc je fais brièvement, par exemple, dans le massacre, soi-disant massacre de Aksum, c'est assez bizarre parce qu'ils avaient donné plusieurs dates différentes. Mais dans cette période-là, il y a une fête religieuse très très connue en Éthiopie où normalement il y a 1 million de personnes qui participent. Mais cette période-là, il y en avait quand même des centaines de milliers qui ont participé. Donc il y avait des images télévision, il y avait des images quand même de tout ça. Et donc comment est-ce qu'il aurait pu avoir un massacre si ils étaient en train de fêter leur grande fête religieuse. Donc, et ils avaient dit que c'était un massacre de 800 personnes, donc c'est pas possible que ça aurait pu avoir lieu et en même temps il y avait une fête religieuse. Donc ça c'était l'un des exemples. Ou par exemple on avait aussi une autre dame dont je connais pas l'histoire, elle s'appelait Mona Lisa
Abrahaya.
Abrahaya.
Mona Lisa Abraha.
Et elle avait dit au début qu'elle avait été violée par des Éthiopiens, puis elle avait changé son histoire, elle avait dit non, c'était des Érythréens, mais Et c'est incroyable parce qu'effectivement, elle faisait partie du milice. Donc, même si c'est vrai qu'elle a été quand même blessée, c'est pas que le fait qu'elle a vraiment eu du mal quand même, mais c'était pas vrai l'histoire qu'elle racontait. Donc, c'est un peu ça. L'autre chose terrible que Elias Amare nous raconte, c'est que quand même, je crois que c'était vers juin, quand le gouvernement avait repris la ville, était en train de reprendre la ville de Tigray au nord, ils ont libéré 13 000 criminels dans des prisons et leur même donné des uniformes, des fois des militaires, parce qu'il y a une fabrique là dans la région qui fabrique carrément tous les uniformes de l'armée nationale. Et donc, ils les ont laissés libres pour faire ce qu'ils voulaient. Donc, il avait vraiment une période de non-loi dans cette région qui était assez terrible. Et là, j'avais encore, et par exemple aussi, oui, et après l'autre dont on avait parlé, ce qu'on avait dit aussi qu'ils étaient très près de la ville. Par exemple, oui, ils étaient à 300-400 kilomètres de la ville, de la capitale, mais déjà toutes les ambassades, spécialement l'ambassade américaine en particulier, disaient ils sont presque entrés dans la ville, et c'est vraiment une manière pour créer de la panique dans la ville, de déstabiliser le pays, et aussi dedans de rendre les gens pas sûrs, non.
Et surtout de faire trembler les diplomaties qui sont à la capitale d'Addis.
Voilà.
Les diplomates des pays occidentaux, pour que eux ils puissent partir pour dire que vraiment
parce que c'est le siège de l'Union africaine.
De l'Union africaine,
donc,
oui.
Avoir ça, non, faire partir les diplomates, ça aurait vraiment causé. Donc, c'est vraiment une manière très efficace de leur part. Voilà, après, à travers les médias, ils reprennent tout ça et voilà, c'est vraiment des opérations de déstabilisation.
Psychologique, et ça marche parce qu'en tant qu'être humain, ça marche beaucoup, la déstabilisation psychologique.
As a footnote here, the Zambian embassy, when it withdrew its staff, about 20 some from Addis Ababa, a few days before, USAID, Samantha Power had met with the president of Zambia, and USAID had given generously some millions of dollars. Of course, it's a reward, a quid pro quo type of thing. You see the connection? Yes. Shamefully, Zambia had to cooperate in such. Fortunately, it was only Zambia who participated in this shameful thing.
I think it was also Germany. No,
that goes without saying. The Western embassies. I'm talking about African.
Donc, le seul pays africain qui avait participé à cette retire des diplomates, c'était la Zambie. Toi, tu as compris, non? Tu peux traduire, non, parce qu'effectivement, tu traduis mieux que moi.
La Zambie, oui, ils ont donné beaucoup d'argent au pays pour pouvoir, voilà, essayer d'avoir les gens avec l'argent. Et cela se passe en ce moment au Burkina Faso. L'ambassadeur de la France a reçu de l'argent au Burkina Faso. Il a convoqué les associations de jeunes burkinabés de venir prendre de l'argent pour faire marcher leurs associations. Là, en ce moment, Afrique Média en a parlé il y a la semaine dernière. Et au Mali, ils sont en train de financer l'opposition contre le gouvernement en place. Donc, c'est vrai que les Occidentaux, ils déstabilisent psychologiquement, ils déstabilisent financièrement aussi. Parce qu'ils ont de l'argent à donner aux soi-disant opposants, ils créent des oppositions, et avec cet argent, les gens font de la corruption pour essayer de rassembler des gens en masse dans la ville contre le gouvernement en place. Le gouvernement souverain suivi par le peuple malien. Donc, ce que dit Elias est très vrai. Il passe par tous les moyens psychologiques et le moyen financier. C'est le cas de la Zambie.
She's underlining that the same thing is happening in Burkina Faso now, where they're financing the opposition now.
I understood a little bit.
And so they destabilize also financially, not only psychologically, not only with media, but also a lot of money is involved. Bon, c'est C'est vraiment grave.
Mais il faut le dénoncer comme on fait ce soir. Voilà.
Oui, but we must denounce it like we are doing tonight.